Good morning, good morning. A very warm welcome to Birds Poetry and Literature and episode 1 of this series. And today we are going to be looking at this incredible book. This is Ovid's Metamorphoses. Now, Ovid was born about 43 BC, so quite old text here, but it wasn't translated into English until about 500 years ago, and it's a Roman Latin narrative poem, and consists of about 15 books in total within this, and each of those books have different stories, and it's one of those books that you can sort of go to different chapters and just start reading. It's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to read it from beginning to end, but it does start off with the world's creation and it ends up with the death of Julius Caesar. There are many characters within this text that we're probably all very familiar with, such as Pegasus and Perseus, and Hercules, Ulysses, Achilles, and so on. And of course, you've got some of the mythical creatures like the centaur and the minotaur and things like that. So it's a fantastic book, and it's influenced some great writers as such as Dante and Shakespeare, and of course Chaucer. And it's been a lot of fun going through this. Now, there is, throughout the whole book, it is the metamorphosis, so a lot of the stories involve people or gods or nymphs turning into other creatures, and a lot of them are birds. So there is a lot of reference in this, and I had to be quite picky on what I was going to bring to you because there is so much. So because it is from Roman Latin, the names of the gods on Olympus are different to the Greek gods. So you've got things like Jupiter and Jove, who represent Zeus. You've got Juno, who represents Hera. You have Phoebus, who is Apollo. You have Minerva or Pallas, who represents Athena. So it can get a little confusing, but as long as you keep that in mind, it's fine. And it's been translated by A.D. Melville, and I have no reference to other translations, but I've quite enjoyed this book and going through it. And so there's a few stories that I want to bring up. Most memorable is the story of Tereus Procne and Philomela, but that story I talked about in Birding Wisdom Part 2, and I don't want to have to repeat that because it's quite a long story. So if you're interested in that story, and it's all to do with the nightingale, you can go to Birding Wisdom Part 2 and you can look that up, and it's a very interesting lineage there. I'm going to read one of the stories called the Raven and the Crow, the complete story. Now it's a couple of pages long. It's a really interesting piece of work, and then after that I'm going to just highlight a couple of other parts that I found interesting. So bear with me. I apologise if some of the names aren't described properly, but let's see how we get on. So this is the Raven and the Crow. The raven had been a silvery bird with snow-white wings, pure as the spotless dove's. his whiteness rivalling the wakeful geese, whose voice would one day save the capital, and rivalling the swans that love the streams. His ruin was his tongue, his chattering tongue turned that white colour to its opposite. Now in all the land of Thessaly no girl was lovelier than Coronis of Larissa. She certainly was Phoebus's favourite, so long as she was chaste or not found out. But Phoebus's bird had found her faithfulness and hastened to his master to reveal the guilt she hid, ruthless to tell his tale. To learn the latest news, a garrulous crow flapped quickly after him, and when it heard his journey's aim, "To no good end," it said, "you make your journey. Heed my prophetic tongue. See what I was, what I am now, and ask, did I deserve it? Frank good faith you'll find was my undoing. Once upon a time, a baby, Erechnothonis, was born without a mother. Palaces hid the child, safe in a box of wickerwork, and gave the box to Ceracrops's 3 unmarried daughters, with strict instructions not to pry inside. I hid amongst the delicate foliage of a large leafy elm and watched to see what they would do. 2, Pandrosus and Herse impeccably observed their trust, but 1, Aglorus, called them cowards and untied the fastenings, and there inside they saw the baby, and beside him stretched a snake. I told the goddess. All the thanks I got was to be banished from Minerva's sight, reduced to the rank below that of a bird of night. Now we'll come back to that in a little while. My punishment might well warn birds to watch their tongues and take no risks. No doubt you'll think I pestered her, and not that she chose me. Ask Pallas herself. Of course she was angry, but not too angry to admit the truth. My father was the famous king of Prosis, Coronius, as the world knows well enough, and I was a princess, and I was wooed, you must not laugh, by many a wealthy man. My beauty doomed me. One day, on the shore, pacing across the sand with long, slow strides, as I still do, the sea god saw me there and fell in love with me. And when his pleas and winning words proved but a waste of time, he tried to force me. In my flight I left the hard, firm beach, and soon in the soft sand was quite worn out. In vain I cried help to gods and men. No human heard my voice. A virgin's anguish moved the virgin's heart, and Pallas brought her aid. I raised my arms to heaven, along my arms a sable down of feathers spread. I strove to throw my cloak back from my shoulders, that was feathers too. Deep rooted in my skin I tried to beat my hands on my bare breast, and had no hands, no bare breast any more. And then I ran, and found the sand no longer clogged my feet. I skimmed the surface, in trice I soared, high up in the air, and I was given to Pallas, her companion without stain. But what good was it, if Nyctemena, she who was made a bird of her foul sin, supplants me in my place of privilege? Or have you never heard the tale renowned all over Lesbos, how Nyctemena outraged her father's bed? Bird she may be, but shuns the daylight and the watching eye. Guilt cursed, her shame shut in the dark unseen, an utter outcast from the sky's bright sheen. Confound your croaks of doom, the raven cried. I scorn false prophets. And he held his course and told his masters Phoebus how he found Coronis in the arms of some bright lad. At that charge her lover's bay wreath slipped, composure, plectrum, colour all were lost. swept in a storm of rage, he seized his bow, by habit strung the string, and shot a shaft unerring, inescapable, to pierce her breast, whereupon so often his own had lain. She screamed, and the arrow came away. Her fair skin was drenched in crimson blood. It could have been, she moaned, that I had borne you a child before you punished me, but now we shall both die together. And her life ebbed with her blood, she breathed her last breath, and through her body stole the chill of death. Too late, alas, too late, the lover rues his cruel punishment and hates himself for lending ear and flaring up so fast. He hates the bird who blithely forced on him the knowledge of that guilt, that font of grief. He hates his bows, his arrow, hates his hand, so rash, so hasty, hugs her huddled there, and tries if some late salve may vanquish her fate, and practices his healing art in vain. And when he finds all fails, and sees the pyre stands ready, and her body soon to burn in the last funeral flames, then, since gods may never wet their cheeks with tears, he groans deep from the very bottom of his heart, as a cow groans who sees before her eyes upon the forehead of her suckling calf, with echoing crash, the high-held hammer fall. He poured unthanked sweet perfumes on her breast, gave her loving last remembrance, and mourned with all due obsequies her death undue. But that his seed should perish in that fire, Phoebus could not endure, and snatched his son out of his mother's womb, out of the flames, and carried him to the two-formed Chiron's cave. As for the raven, whose report was right, and hopes ran high, he turned in black as the night, and banned his breed of birds, whose colours white. Now that Chiron's cave, that is a centaur where the baby was taken. So I just want to very quickly go back to Nyctamine or Nyctamine, and that is the story of a princess who, there are different interpretations of this, but one of them is that she slept with her father, or her father forced himself on her. But whatever the case, she then went out to these woods and hid, and it was Pallas who found her and turned her into an owl. And of course, we know that Minerva or Athena is very much remembered as always being in companionship with an owl, a little owl, Athena noctua. When it comes to the name Nyctine, it reminded me, that name Nict, of when I worked out in Canada, in Alberta, as a forklift driver in a lumberyard. And in slow times I used to try and remember Latin names of birds, and one of them was the snowy owl, which is Nyctea scandiaca. And of course, I think Nyctine means bird of the night or something, which, you know, is completely wrong for the snowy owl. And that bird's name has now changed to bubo instead of Nyctea scandiaca. I think it's bubo scandiacus. Anyway, that name reminded me of that. So that's the crow and the raven, and you know, a fantastic Coronis and her father. That's, you know, if you think of then the Latin names of crows, of the crow family, Corvids comes from that name. Now, so that was the longest part of this. I'm just going to make some short references to a couple of other things here. There is another story that I would like to share when Minerva meets the Muses, and they sort of tell tales, and one of them is about the 9 daughters that are turned into birds. But I'm going to leave that. I found reference to that in another book, and so that will be great to tie them 2 books together. So I'll wait until we get to that particular book and bring that story to your attention. And it's where, as I say, where Minerva meets the Muses of Helicon. But at the end of that particular tale, the Muses talk about several stories, and then Minerva tells a story of her own, and which is about a woman called Arachne, and I think she's made a slight on Minerva, because she's boasted about how well she can weave on her loom, and so Minerva goes down there and they have a challenge, and to produce 2 different each of them to produce a tapestry, and Minerva's tapestry has depictions all throughout the middle of it, but in each corner there's these miniature stories, and one of them tells the tale of how she's insulted and she turns one woman into a crane, and another one where she tells a story of where she turns someone into a stork. And the last, though there are many, the last story I'll bring to mind within Metamorphoses is the story of Io. As it sounds, it's spelled I-O, and she was a princess, and so Jove or Jupiter decided he liked her, and sneaked off and had his way with her, and Juno, or Hera, his wife, knew his old tricks, and she decided to go looking for him, and found him. She was on her way to find him, and he realised what was happening, and so he turned Io into a cow, and but Juno saw right through this and saw what was going on, and so she said to him, give me the cow as a gift. I would like that. And because he didn't want to give his game up, he couldn't refuse her, so he gave her this heifer, and she put it out to pasture, and so Io lived in her human form within this cow, and was very miserable. And because Juno then decides to keep guard on her, and brings in Argus. Now, I'm not quite sure if he's a giant or he's like a mythical creature, but he has many, many eyes, and that's great for keeping an eye on her. But I think that Jupiter feels sorry for her, thinks that she's been punished enough, and he sends down Mercury to take care of business with this Argus. And when he arrives there, he is disguised, and they get into a conversation, and he tells him the story of Pan. And while he's doing this, Argus starts to fall asleep and close many of his eyes, and eventually Mercury realises he's nearly asleep, and so he uses this magic wand to close all of his eyes, and once he's asleep he then slays him, he beheads him right there and then, and Io, as the cow, she sort of runs off into the forest, and I think Jupiter speaks to Juno and says that this girl has been punished enough, and as we all know, it wasn't her fault. Jupiter really forced himself upon her, and came to an agreement to let her continue to live as a woman. I believe that she was then turned into a goddess, or an immortal. And but one of the things that Juno did was she went down to where Argus was beheaded and retrieved all of his eyes, and she is said to have then put them onto the tail of a bird, which is the peacock. So if you think of a peacock with its massive tail spread out, the eyes are meant to be of Argus, and of course she uses those peacocks to pull her through the air on her chariot. So I thought that was a great find. I mean, the majority of this stuff I've never heard of, but it's just fantastic to see it. So anyway, that's just a few of the birds that I found within Metamorphoses. There's plenty more. It is an incredible book, and I've really enjoyed it. So now we're going to move on to a poem next, which I said I was going to do. So this is the work of Ted Hughes. As you can see, this is called Crow. It's it's not a massive book, but it's the story of Crow from beginning to end, and it was written at a time in Ted Hughes's life that was very, very dark, and you really can tell that through a lot of these poems. And I will be bringing some of these to your attention because they, as dark as they are, they're fantastic. And I thought it would be quite a good one to read this short poem, and this is called King of Carrion, within Crow by Ted Hughes. His palace is of skulls, his crown is the last splinters of the vessel of life. His throne is the scaffold of bones, the hanged thing's rack and final stretcher. His robe is the black of the last blood. His kingdom is empty. The empty world from which the last cry flapped hugely, hopelessly away into the blindness and dumbness and deafness of the gulf. Returning, shrunk, silent, to reign over silence. Right, now to come up with a book review. To be honest, if I hadn't have done it already, I would have done Gilbert White's Selborne, because I just think it is one of the most incredible bits of work. But that I covered in Birding Wisdom Part 2, and if you want to look at that, you can see that. We talk quite a lot about what Gilbert White did. So my first book recommendation for for episode 1 is this book, and this is Tim Burkhead's Birds and Us, and this is one of the biggest influences on my journey for birding wisdom. Reading a few more of Professor Burkhead's books, and so I thought this was rightly so. This should be my first recommendation. It is an incredible book. It's got some great prints in it and drawings, and the easiest way to describe this is to give you what's on the back here. So we have worshipped birds as gods, hunted them for sustenance, adorned ourselves in their feathers and studied their wings to engineer flight. In Birds and Us, award-winning writer and ornithologist Tim Burkhead takes us on an epic journey through the shared histories with birds, from ibises mummified and deified by ancient Egyptians to Renaissance observations on woodpecker anatomy, and to the present fight to save endangered species and restore their habitats. So yeah, he's got a whole series of books out and I would recommend any of them. But this is just a fantastic book on the history of birds, and I very much would suggest to anyone who hasn't read this, who's interested in birds, it's a great thing to have part of your library. Well, that's it for episode 1. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I'm sort of doing this off the cuff sort of thing. I'm not putting a lot of practice into this, so it's not always going to be as smooth as I would hope it will be. But because I've got so many books to get through, I don't want to put loads and loads of time into trying to rehearse this stuff. I just have to do it as it comes. Okay, so finally we come to the next episode, episode 2, and in that we will be looking at Animal Farm by George Orwell. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode, and I'll see you in the episode 2.